1964.
In 1964, a few years after the independence of African states, UNESCO launched the big project General History of Africa, which consisted precisely in having the history of Africa written by Africans. A history of Africa stripped of the stereotypes that justified colonization at some point. So, in the wake, they realized that one could not write the history of Africa without starting from oral sources, as Africa is made up mainly of societies with an oral tradition. It was decided in 1966 in Abidjan to create in Africa centers that will collect African oral sources for use in writing the general history of Africa. So it is in this context that in 1968, the Center for Documentation on Oral Traditions in Africa, CRDTO, was created in Niger. If I know the CRDTO, it is due to the testimony of the people who dealt with it. I also know it from a number of writings, some of which are famous. One such piece is La Tradition Orale by Jules Lelaya, one of the founding fathers of the field of oral tradition. It is practically the book of reference when you have to use oral tradition in your work. I would simply like to emphasize the actions of two of them. I want to talk about Dr. Jules Lelaya, who, from Niger himself, was from the onset one of the founders of the organization. He was a seasoned researcher, the author of La Tradition Orale, a book which all researchers refer to. He is a very conscientious man, a hard worker who has trained many young executives. He is the epitome of the passionate man for research, the passionate man for the knowledge of Africa.
Modèle même de l'homme passionné pour la recherche, de l'homme passionné pour la connaissance de l'Afrique. Je voudrais retenir aussi le nom de Mangone Nyang.
I would also like to recall the name of Mangone Nyang. He was the director of CELHTO. He wanted to do research across West Africa between traditional communicators and modern communicators. In other words, combine the two branches of the same science for the purpose of field research. At the time, the issue of human rights was very much in vogue, and research began. I would mention here that with him were bards, meaning the griot, from Mali, Senegal, Burkina Faso, and naturally Guinean bards. So it was with them that it was possible to reconstitute the Charter of Kurukanfuga, the famous Charter of Kurukanfuga. And the CRDTO will work with UNESCO to collect oral sources in order to write the general history of Africa. It is in 1974 that the CRDTO will be incorporated in the organization chart of the Organization of African Unity under the name of Center for Research in Linguistics and History through Oral Tradition, and thereby becomes a regional office of the African Union Commission. At the time when we were collecting oral traditions, since it must be said here, we had made a demand that oral traditions be reckoned with, that they are all collected, for one cannot write the history of Africa while dismissing oral traditions. UNESCO abided by that demand. CELHTO is an extremely significant institution, especially key to the development of African culture. It is also true that CELHTO brings together only 12 countries. However, its scope could be extended to all of Africa because it addresses issues that relate essentially to Africans, meaning data collection, transcription, etc. The first libraries were born in Africa. They were not born anywhere else. Therefore, I believe we must reconcile with our own history. We must know that there has been a historical discontinuity, and historical continuity must be restored. On that level, we will in fact concur by saying that indeed we must restore the reading habits we have lost. But let it be known that these are habits that we have lost. Following through the missions that were assigned to CRDTO, CELHTO will essentially take charge of the collection of African oral traditions. However, in 2005, in Maputo, the field of expertise of CELHTO will be expanded, and it will convert into a center that will more and more work on all issues related to culture on the African continent. And since 2006, CELHTO will be coupled with a twin center in the name of ACALAN, African Academy of Languages. The two centers will become specialized centers of the African Union Commission, which supports the Culture Division of the African Union, headquartered in Addis Ababa, for the purpose of promoting culture as an essential component of issues of development throughout the continent. CELHTO is extremely important. Why? Because, as I recall, when it came to translating the general history of Africa in Hausa and Fulfulde, it was CELHTO that made a significant contribution, that provided assistance, because when the commission that would work in Hausa and the one that would work in Fulfulde were put in place, it is CELHTO that provided both commissions everything that was needed for their work in terms of technical needs and infrastructure, in collaboration with the IRSH of the University Abdou Moumouni of Niamey. CELHTO has done a job which, from my point of view, is remarkable. It publishes every year Le Cahier du CELHTO, which is a place where articles can be published, a place today where many young researchers or older researchers express themselves to know their thoughts. Thus giving a kind of resurrection and new life to oral sources, oral traditions, and African thought, which are the place where our identity expresses itself, in other words, who and what we are. In the last 2 or 3 years, CELHTO has taken on a new challenge. It must be encouraged. It must be engaged to carrying out a number of urgent actions. I have known CELHTO much more in its new design. And the CELHTO that I have known is an institution that works on oral traditions, on history, but that works also on all sciences in need of oral sources and oral traditions for their accomplishment, self-affirmation, and self-expression. It's an institution to reckon with in the future. Firsthand, it's about collecting oral sources, but it is also about the whole issue of national languages. National language is a paramount step into development. We cannot continue to use the languages of others in our thinking process and expect to be able to actually reflect. One cannot reflect in someone else's language. Yes, the problematic of national languages goes hand in hand with a major issue, which one to pick. But even then, populations can come to an understanding. There are groups of neighboring languages. The credibility of tradition appeared at that time. Tradition cultivated genres. It cultivates the epic. It has its history. This is a narrated story that goes back to the 13th century. From that moment on, oral traditions was taken with much seriousness. This is how data collections began across Africa. The Africanists took it very seriously, so much so that the English, French, American, and German teams traveled across Africa looking for bards, meaning the griot, and elders to recollect oral traditions. At ECOWAS, we have programs that we have shared with CELHTO, particularly in the context of the review of one of the volumes of the General History of Africa. In the same way, we are prepared to work together in other areas that concern us. CELHTO nowadays affords research grants to young researchers. It makes its library accessible to all those who need it, and it brings together researchers every year for a symposium. That is a lot, and I hope it will continue in this direction. Oral tradition is only a matter of transmission through the spoken word. It's not that we didn't know writing. It's not that we didn't write. It's not that we didn't read. It's just that when we want to transmit things, conceptions that are important to us, we proceed by way of initiation. We take someone who is going to become a disciple or who is going to follow a path, and we tell him, there it is. At this level, it is what I have learned.
L'oralité est la mère de l'écrit.
Orality is the mother of writing. Raise the issue of oral traditions and now work on oral traditions. I must tell you that it has been a difficult problem for Europeans to admit that orality has a value and that oral traditions have any value. Over the past 30 or 40 years, researchers, be it as individuals or groups, have collected documents that are kept in very bad condition in various countries, either in institutes or research centers or in the researchers' private residences. Action must be taken to collect these documents, retrieve them, digitize them, and make them available for research purposes.
Le CELHTO publie
CELHTO publishes a lot. CELHTO has published a lot of researchers. CELHTO has translated lots of sources. CELHTO has made its technical and financial assets available to some institutions to provide those institutions the chance to develop themselves. Indeed, CELHTO has the essential mission of working to rebuild, preserve, and to value all the issues related to our memory on the continent. CELHTO must continue on the basis that it has set for itself. If CELHTO can continue to have a journal where scientific articles are published on oral tradition, on the arts, on culture, if CELHTO can continue to organize seminars, if CELHTO can give young researchers a boost by offering them a research grant or short stays to explore its data bank, its books, I think the future is bright. My wish would be for CELHTO to really be expanded to the level of the whole continent, for CELHTO to be able to encompass all activities related to other centers, such as CELHTO. I agree, but at least have its field of competence expanded. This, I believe, would allow CELHTO to benefit from the added value of what others are doing right in the other regions of the continent and have the capacity to capitalize on it in the region covered by CELHTO. 50 years is not eternity, but it is a time that must be accounted for. CELHTO has held its ground during these 50 years. I think it should be pointed out, knowing all the difficulties that CELHTO went through, because CELHTO is an institution of the African Union, of the OAU first, then of the African Union. The institution does not necessarily have all the money it needs to work, to be independent, and act accordingly. The problem of funding is always there. It is not a secondary problem to be overlooked. It is the one problem that is unavoidable. You have to solve it in order to move forward. You have to secure a fund so as to move forward.